Well, that was weird. Flowmotion, a mechanic first introduced in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance that allows you to make use of your environment for traversal and combat. It's basically super magical anime parkour. Sora and Riku first used this power when travelling through the sleeping worlds for their Mark of Mastery exam, which is apparently the modern day equivalent of hitting a bunch of magic lemons. But how did they learn Flowmotion? I don't know, Sora just saw Neku doing it, and then the rest came naturally. Though to be fair, Sora has been known to pull off some impressive feats of acrobatics in the past. It's just now it actually has a name. Sprinkle in some pink and there you have it. Oh my. Or at least it was pink until it became blue when the mechanic was carried over into Kingdom Hearts 3. I've always really liked Flowmotion, and I was really glad to see it return in KH3. It had even been given some adjustments that I believe were for the better. In this video, I would like to analyse and compare Flowmotion between the two games and see where its strengths and weaknesses lie. There's quite a bit to cover, so let's get started. Okay, how about we start with the basics. Flowmotion allows you to traverse the world with great speed and style, and can be activated in a bunch of ways. The most common way you'll likely trigger it is by kicking off a wall. To do this, you need only air slide or dodge roll into a wall, and Sora will step onto it and begin to glow pink. This pink aura surrounding him is an indication that Flowmotion is currently active. From here, you have a few different options to get the flow going. If you attempt an air slide while in Flowmotion, Sora will instead perform a super slide. This can shoot you through the air at high speed much farther than a standard air slide. You can even chain super slides together by continuously kicking off walls, allowing you to cover a lot of ground quickly. But perhaps I could instead interest you in a super jump. As the name suggests, if you press the jump button while Flowmotion is active, Sora will take a massive leap in the air. By combining these two moves, you can essentially play the most effortless game of the floor is lava ever, but more on that later. Wall kicking isn't the only way to activate Flowmotion. You can also use objects in the environment as well. If you air slide into a pole, such as this lamppost, you can initiate a pole spin, and then you can either jump or slide off of it just like with walls. Though if you take too long, Sora will let go of the pole after a few seconds. The poor guy gets dizzy. There are also horizontal poles that you can swing on too, but they aren't as common as the vertical ones. The last of the essential movement abilities tied to Flowmotion is rail grinding. This move will trigger Flowmotion automatically just by simply stepping onto a rail, and then Sora will begin riding on it. You know, just like Sonic does. Once on a rail, you can super jump or super slide to get off of it. You are also able to rapidly use super slides while on a rail to travel slightly faster, and by moving the analog stick in the opposite direction you're travelling in, Sora will follow suit and quickly start rail grinding in the opposite direction too. Okay, now that I've covered the basics of Flowmotion, let's hop over to Kingdom Hearts 3 for a bit and see how that game handled it. Like I said before, the first thing you may notice is that Flowmotion is now blue instead of pink. I'm not positive as to why they changed the colour, but I like to think that it may be because the pink aura fits well with Dream Drop Distance since that game's entire colour theme was pink, and it may look a tad out of place in KH3. If you want an in-universe reason, my headcanon is that Flowmotion is simply pink in the dream world and blue in the real world. Easy. You're welcome. Anyway, to be honest, Flowmotion in KH3 is a lot more dialed back compared to Dream Drop Distance, but this is actually more of a positive in my eyes. I feel this way mostly because Flowmotion in DDD is actually kinda overpowered, in more ways than one. Let me put it this way, when Flowmotion is activated, you are given one super slide and one super jump. Once these two actions are performed, they cannot be used again until you either bounce off another wall, interact with another Flowmotion object like a pole, or deactivate and reactivate Flowmotion entirely. If one of these criteria are met, the super slide and super jump are recharged, so to speak, and you can use them again. Here is where this starts to become a bit of a problem though. It is so incredibly easy to recharge these actions by wall kicking that you are basically able to super jump off the same wall infinitely as long as you keep sliding into it. While doing this can be fun in its own right and gives you a lot of freedom with traversal, it also allows you to completely ignore the actual level design fairly often. It's strange because there are so many platforms, rails, poles, and other things that you can interact with to explore and find secrets, but sometimes it feels like, what's the point in all that stuff being there if I can just infinitely super jump my way there and it's a lot simpler? And you can do this pretty much anywhere. As long as you have a wall to slam your face into, you have all the power. Arguably too much of it at times. I don't mean to sound too negative. I don't even really hate the super jumping. Heck, I use it all the time. It can be fun to use. It just feels kinda wrong sometimes, though I suppose no one is forcing you to do it. I usually like to refrain and engage with the actual level design, but the option to jump over everything is always there, tempting me. Okay, that was a long aside, but getting back to KH3. This game made some subtle changes to how Flowmotion works that makes it less of a crutch and more of a useful tool. Earlier, I said that when Flowmotion activates, you are given a super slide and super jump that can be recharged primarily by wall kicking. KH3 also does this, but changes it so that only the super slide is recharged and not the super jump. Once the super jump is used, it cannot be used again until you either hit the ground, a grind rail, or spun off a pole. This means that you can't abuse the super jump to scale up any wall you want, you just get the one. And it can be useful as a slight leg up, but you can't be using it to completely trivialize all of the level design. But speaking of scaling up walls, KH3 actually does have a proper wall running mechanic as well. This doesn't really pose the same problem as the super jumping in DDD though, as you can only scale up certain walls and it feels like the game was actually designed with this in mind. You can technically do infinite super jumps on these runnable walls since wall running recharges your super jump, but it doesn't matter because you're supposed to scale them. I imagine that you could still find a way to skip over sections with all this stuff, but at the very least it won't be quite so effortless. So right off the bat, KH3 deals with reeling in one of Flowmotion's most overpowered features, but it doesn't stop there. Super Slide got a slight readjustment too, and not just in the way that the movement feels a bit different. In KH3, Super Slide is an ability that gets more effective as you progress. This is because at the start, your Flowmotion actions are quite limited, in that the Super Slide is very short and you don't even have the ability to super jump until later in the game. In Dream Drop Distance, the entirety of Flowmotion is at your disposal right from the get-go, and it never changes. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, I just like how in KH3 it's a power that you gradually build up over time. You start the game with just one super slide in your abilities menu, but as you progress you get additional super slides that stack up to make it more effective. I imagine not everyone would like being limited at the start, but I personally find it more satisfying this way. It's down to taste, I suppose. Oh, and by the way, you can still chain super slides together to continuously bounce off walls. There was never really anything wrong with this, and I'm glad it stuck around. It's just fun to do. One really good change, or rather something they just straight up removed, was being able to initiate a wall kick by dodge rolling into a wall. Yeah, rolling into a wall to activate Flowmotion was pretty much always inferior to air sliding. This is mostly because rolling has quite a bit more startup lag, which is particularly inconvenient when you roll into a wall accidentally when all you wanted to do was dodge an attack. There are no invincibility frames when this happens, so if it does, may the fuzzy nightmare creatures have mercy on you. KH3 simply made it so that dodge rolling doesn't trigger Flowmotion anymore. A pretty good decision, I'd say. Rail grinding wasn't really changed in any major way, but I suppose you could say it was expanded upon. Usually, rail grinding functions the same way that it did in Dream Drop Distance, but in KH3 they added another kind of rail. These are called rail gauntlets, and they're a bit more, shall we say, scripted. Once you've hopped on the rail, you have to ride it to the end and can't switch directions midway through. You can't super jump off it either, you're locked on that path. As you ride the rail, you may be attacked by Heartless, but you can shoot them with this vague, magical blaster shot attack, kinda like Wisdom form in KH2. These rails will sometimes have context-specific actions as well, like being able to hang from under the rail in Monstropolis, or being able to switch to an adjacent rail in San Francisco. Aside from that, one thing that's technically worse about KH3's rail grinding is that you can't really use super slides to go slightly faster anymore. Though considering some of the stuff that you can pull off in KH3, I don't think this is a huge loss. Pole spinning is relatively unchanged, but one small downside is that in Dream Drop Distance, Sora could also start a pole spin by super jumping onto it. But in KH3, this feature was removed. You have to slide. So I guess that's a point in DDD's favour. Not that we're keeping score or anything. Get that out of here. In terms of movement options, there's one more thing I'd like to cover, and that's how you can interact with magic to activate Flowmotion. Using the Aero magic spell will create a small temporary whirlwind. Touching it will automatically trigger a super jump. Alternatively, casting Blizzard will have Sora shoot a shard of ice forwards that deals damage on impact, but if the shard is close to the ground, it will leave a trail of ice as it travels. And this can be used as a makeshift grind rail whenever you need it. It's pretty useful for getting around open areas quickly. Dream Drop Distance didn't do anything like this. The closest comparison I can make is how there are certain objects that can trigger a super jump, like these tents or these vents. Crap, I didn't mean for that to rhyme. I'm just gonna leave it. Oh wait, I almost forgot about something. KH3 has this pretty simple parkour feature where you can hop along certain points indicated with these little sparkly things. Sometimes, and by sometimes I mean like a couple times in the game, the sparkles will be so far apart from each other that Sora will have to use Flowmotion to jump between them. It's really just visual flare, just mentioning it for the sake of being thorough. Alright, I think that's about everything I wanted to cover about the movement for now. So let's move on to... Oh, hold on, I'm getting a call. I thought I set this thing to silent. Hello?
Yo!
Grim?
Yep. So, I hear you're talking about Kingdom Hearts.
How did you know that?
I don't know, twin thing?
Oh yeah. So, do you want in or what?
Nah, I'm just here because you forgot something.
Excuse me?
Yeah, Aqua uses Flowmotion in Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage. See? Look at that. Look at her go. Whee! She can't do any of your fancy jumps or attacks, but it's definitely Flowmotion, even if it is just grinding on rails.
I guess you're right. She even has the blue glow around her and everything.
Great. Glad we got that sorted out.
Now don't ever forget about her again.
Okay, gotta go now, bye!
I was getting to that. As I was saying, let's move on to Flowmotion's combat features. Much like with the movement, the combat side of Flowmotion is fairly similar between the two games, but KH3 makes some tweaks to make it a little bit more balanced. Though that's not to say that Flowmotion isn't fun to use in DDD. Well, I think it is at least. But before getting into all that, I should probably go over how you actually use Flowmotion to fight in the first place. When Flowmotion is active, regardless of the means, the button that would usually say attack on your command menu will turn pink and instead display a Flowmotion attack. Pressing the attack button at this point will initiate the attack displayed, and there are a bunch of different Flowmotion attacks that are available for you to use. The particular attack that's used is dependent on the last Flowmotion movement action you were using prior. In other words, attacking after a super jump will initiate a different move than if you attack after a super slide. This is also true for KH3, but to a point. More on that in a bit. All of the Flowmotion attacks in Dream Drop Distance share similar aspects. They are all quite flashy and cinematic and feel like special finishing moves, typically with a dynamic camera. Each of them pack quite a punch, but they also leave you quite open both during and after the attack. On top of that, once a Flowmotion attack is initiated, you can't cancel it, and there's also a fair amount of end lag after the attack is used. Not to mention, you're still vulnerable to enemy attacks during all of this. Flowmotion attacks in KH3 are dialed back to the point where the amount of damage they deal isn't too much more significant than your regular Keyblade swings. I find that the attacks function better as tools to help you string together combos or deal with certain kinds of combat situations, since you're able to easily transition from them to your normal combo string. With all that being said, let's go through each Flowmotion attack for both games and see how they work and how they changed. First up, we have Kick Dive. This can be used either right after kicking off a wall or after a super slide. Kick Dive will have you drill towards an enemy before doing an AoE slam attack on the ground. This attack is pretty good for closing in and dealing damage on a single target, but you are a bit more vulnerable during it than with most of the other attacks. Using it when things get crowded is a bit risky, but the AoE slam might make that risk worth it. KH3 replaced Kick Dive with Sonic Slash. This attack is activated in the same ways as Kick Dive, but is instead a much simpler vertical slash downwards and another one as an uppercut. Again, this doesn't really do any more damage than your regular Keyblade swings, but it's great for knocking smaller enemies up into the air so you can chain them into an air combo. Up next we have Shock Dive, and I'm not going to beat around the bush, this is probably the most overpowered and spammable attack in Dream Drop Distance. It can be used following a super jump and has you do a slashing attack down towards the ground that generates a large shockwave on impact. Shock Dive is very powerful, can be used in almost any situation, and the end lag doesn't matter all that much since most enemies will be knocked away by the shockwave. There's not much stopping you from spamming this constantly. It's not the best for large bosses, but for most normal Dream Eaters it'll give you results. In KH3, Shock Dive was reworked into Sonic Cleave. It's pretty similar with it being a big slash downwards, but this time the radius for the attack is a lot smaller and primarily affects targets in front of you. This attack is good for getting the jump on enemies directly below you, and the small shockwave can still put small groups into disarray. Following that, we have Buzzsaw. Just press the attack button when swinging on a vertical pole and Sora will do a large spin attack. Comparatively to other Flowmotion attacks, Buzzsaw doesn't do as much damage, but it's relatively safe to use, doesn't leave you as open, and can hit enemies in a wide area. I should also mention that pole spinning tends to draw in enemies, so this should help with landing attacks. KH3 actually kept the name this time, and it's pretty much the same as it was in DDD, except the attack is a bit faster and more brief. Next, there's Wheel Rush. This attack can be used when swinging on a horizontal pole. Sora will fling himself into the air and then rush towards an enemy, which seems pretty cool, but I'd say this is probably one of, if not the worst Flowmotion attack in the game in my opinion. Its accuracy is kinda garbage, you don't have much control over it, and the damage isn't anything too special either. Not to mention that horizontal poles are relatively uncommon. Yeah, you're probably not going to see this attack too often. So it's a good thing that KH3 revamped it into Somersault. Well, I say revamped, but it's really just a vertical buzzsaw. Its range isn't amazing, since you'll mainly be spinning in place when using the attack, but you're way more likely to actually hit something this time around. Next, give it up for Sliding Dive. This is an attack that can be used when grinding on rails. Initiating it will have Sora warp to a nearby enemy and drill the Keyblade into their skull. This attack is only really good for single targets, but to make up for that, it brings some real pain, if it actually connects. Yeah, I find the accuracy of this attack to be a bit of a gamble. Despite warping to an enemy, it has the tendency to miss, which can leave you incredibly open. It's another risky one for sure. Kingdom Hearts 3 actually doesn't have this attack at all. If you attack while grinding on a rail, Sora will just use Sonic Slash. Actually, you could consider Sonic Slash the default Flowmotion attack. Regardless, this change doesn't really bug me much, though the counter kick reprisal ability bears a striking resemblance to Sliding Dive. Okay, so there are a few more Flowmotion attacks to go over, but ones that are unique to each game. Dream Drop Distance has... That's a dumb name, I'm not saying that. I'ma call it the Super Duper Bop, or SDB for short. The SDB can be used when spinning on an enemy. Oh yeah, that's a thing you can do by the way. You can even jump and slide off them, but it only works on large enemies. Anyway, while spinning on an enemy, pressing the attack button will have Sora do this big, dramatic, slow motion strike that can launch enemies into others for extra damage. Sounds pretty good, but if you're anything like me, you'll probably forget it exists. Like, why would I do all that when I could just... Kingdom Hearts 3 has some unique Flowmotion attacks of its own, ones that are tied to the form change mechanic. I could make an entire video about form changes, so for now I'll keep it brief. Each Keyblade in KH3 has a form change associated with it. When activated, Sora's moveset and abilities will change up, and the Keyblade will usually transform into a different weapon, like a shield for example. And a few of these form changes were given their own Flowmotion attack for you to use while you're in them. First up, we have Flying Clobber, which you can use with both the Hyper Hammer and Boom Hammer form changes. This attack replaces Sonic Cleave and can be activated in the same ways. It's basically a big downward slam attack with a shockwave. Though, to be honest, this attack is a bit of a letdown since you can already use it without Flowmotion. It's really a basic attack for when you're targeting an enemy below you. It's just that using Flowmotion, you can initiate it at any time. Sora actually stops glowing blue when using it, but the ability menu still considers this a Flowmotion attack, so I felt the need to mention it. Same story with Spear Dive, the Flowmotion attack attached to the High Wind form change. It's a downward lunge attack that you can use normally anyway, it's just that, again, with Flowmotion you can use it whenever. Now here we have a Flowmotion attack that is actually unique, that being Winding Strike, which can be used while you're in the Agile Claws and Blizzard Claws form changes. This replaces Sonic Slash and will have Sora drill towards your target. It looks pretty cool, and kinda reminds me of Kick Dive from Dream Drop Distance. Sora even has a slightly different Super Slide animation to go with it. Form changes having their own Flowmotion attacks is an idea that I quite like. I wish they leaned into it more. Not every form change would suit having them, but I think it would still be a nice inclusion for the most part. Okay, so KH3's Flowmotion has one more major feature associated with it that I've yet to mention till now because it's technically a separate mechanic. However, I personally see it as an extension of Flowmotion, so here we go. This is the Airstep. Using it allows you to zip between targets at incredible speeds. You activate it by holding the R1 button, which will momentarily slow down time and bring up a targeting reticle. Now this would normally be used for the shotlock mechanic, but that's a topic for another day. When moving the target over enemies or certain objects, you'll notice little squares popping up over them. While still holding R1, press square and Sora will quickly slide over to whatever you were targeting. You can even lock onto multiple targets to have Sora rapidly bounce between them like a deranged pinball. You may have noticed the blue glow surrounding Sora while airstepping. Yep, the airstep will immediately trigger Flowmotion. There's even a small amount of enemies in the game that Sora will pole spin on if they're airstepped into. Attacking while doing so will result in a buzzsaw. Airstepping into any other enemy will cause Sora to backflip off it before being able to use a Flowmotion attack then and there. The attack used will actually depend on the circumstances, and this is actually a good time to talk about another change that KH3 made to Flowmotion attacks. Remember earlier when I said the particular attack that's used is dependent on the last Flowmotion movement action you were using prior? This is also true for KH3, but to a point. More on that in a bit. Yeah, so Kingdom Hearts 3 introduced a feature to Flowmotion Combat that will cause you to use different attacks based on the placement of targets. For example, ordinarily attacking after a super slide will have Sora use Sonic Slash. However, if the enemy you're targeting is below you when this happens, Sora will automatically do a Sonic Cleave instead so he can actually hit it. In other words, the current location of the enemies can sometimes overwrite the normal rules. Here's another example. If Flowmotion is active while you're surrounded, Sora is likely to use Buzzsaw. It's like he's thinking for himself a bit more. I sometimes like to airstep into a large group and just rip them all to shreds with this attack. It's pretty fun. This is an addition that I really appreciate, and context-sensitive attacks have always been a thing in the series, so applying it to Flowmotion as well makes all the sense to me. One last thing I wanted to go over are some miscellaneous details. Some minor ones that I didn't know how to bring up till now, and some major ones that I genuinely really like. For instance, I like the attention to detail that went into some of the animations. Usually, the Super Slide animation will have Sora hold the Keyblade out in front of him as he travels. Because of this, I actually think you can do a small amount of damage to enemies if you slide into them. But Super Sliding off a pole will actually have a different animation. Since Sora uses the Keyblade to swing, he can't easily have it in front of him for the slide, so he puts his foot forward for a kick instead. I also really like the animation for the super jump. When Sora jumps, he does a flip, but it looks as though he scrambles a little bit to keep his balance, and I love that this animation was kept for KH3. After all, the events of this game happen right after Dream Drop Distance, so it makes sense that he's not completely used to it yet. Compare that to Riku, who jumps with a lot more control and composure. It is quite consistent with his character to be just a bit more naturally talented with these kinds of things. He even does a double flip when performing a shock dive. Speaking of Riku, you may notice in the cutscene when Sora first sees Flowmotion in action that if you look closely, Neku is just using Riku's animations. There are only a few other times where Flowmotion is used in cutscenes, like this one with Riku on the grid, another one with Riku wall-kicking in Traverse Town, and this one with Sora catching up to Spillikin in the Symphony of Sorcery. In KH3, we have this scene in Monstropolis, and another one with Sora running the Flash Tracer course in San Francisco. Oh, and I guess there's this one with Sora riding on these smoke trails in the Caribbean. There's no blue aura surrounding him, but there is during actual gameplay, so I suppose this counts. You know, I really appreciate it when game mechanics are represented in cutscenes. Okay, now let's try and rapid fire through a few more small things. In Dream Drop Distance, once you kick off a wall, you seemingly have an unlimited amount of time to perform a Flowmotion movement action or attack before you hit the ground. But in KH3, you have an incredibly small window of time before Flowmotion wears off. This is a change that I don't think impacts anything all that much. I didn't really notice until I started making this video. Did you know that in DDD you can disable most of your Flowmotion abilities? They're all listed with the rest of your action commands. You just have to scroll down a bit and there they are. You can remove all of them if you want. Doing so will still leave you with the ability to wall kick, super slide and super jump, but everything else will be locked. So if you want to do a challenge run of sorts, then go nuts. You can disable Flowmotion abilities in KH3 as well, but it's a bit more obvious because of the way the abilities menu is laid out in that game. And unlike DDD, you can disable everything, with the exception of rail grinding, which isn't listed and just seems to be a part of Sora's natural moveset. Also in Dream Drop Distance, you can use the Faithline Reality Shift in the City of Bells to create some temporary grind rails. Reality Shift is again another topic for another day, but something I noticed is that if you super jump off one of these rails, the pink aura will disappear despite Flowmotion still being very much active. Must be a small oversight. On top of that, I also noticed that even if you have rail grinding disabled, you can still use faith lines. Even sliding dive works. I don't think this is an oversight or anything though. More like reality shift takes precedence over what Flowmotion abilities you currently have installed. Still pretty interesting though, I never would have found out about this before. In Kingdom Hearts 3, your party members also possess some Flowmotion ability, but this just seems to be limited to rail grinding. Although there's no blue glow when they do it, so maybe it's not Flowmotion? Well then I guess everyone packed their soap shoes. I couldn't help but notice while editing this video the uncanny similarity between the blue aura of Flowmotion in KH3 and Noctis's Warp Strike ability in Final Fantasy XV. I suppose they are somewhat similar, and I do appreciate the visual consistency. And I think that's just about everything. Perhaps there's a bit more depth to this mechanic than you thought, huh? In conclusion, I do believe that KH3's version is a bit better, but I do still get a kick out of the original system too. It may also be entirely down to personal preference which one you like more. Like, you may enjoy the fact that the attacks in DDD feel more like big finishes compared to what KH3 does. Personally, I feel that KH3 is all set on big, flashy finisher moves and doesn't really need Flowmotion for that, but that's just me. But now I'd like to know what you all think about Flowmotion down in them comments. Which version do you prefer? As far as I can tell, Flowmotion is all set to return in Kingdom Hearts 4, so I'll be interested to see if it receives any more adjustments. But without further delay, pencils at the ready everyone. Wait, you know that this was all for a test, right? Did I forget to mention that? Hello, thanks for watching to the end of the video. This video was a bit of a passion project for me. I mean, they all have been. But this and the Destiny Islands video that I did a while back were videos that I've wanted to make for years, even before I started making these videos. So it was nice to make it a reality. I was actually thinking about making similar videos about other game mechanics in the series, but I've no doubt that there are other creators out there who have already made really good videos on such topics, so I don't know if it's entirely worth me doing it as well, but it would be my own personal take on it, so I don't know. Anyway, I wanted to give thanks to SleepyGrim, who's my twin, for making a little appearance in the middle of the video. They're also the one who did the artwork for that bit. This is a friendly reminder that you can subscribe if you want to stay up to date with my uploads. But with all that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, stay safe, and I hope to see you again very soon. Take care.